Hi, good evening, everyone. I want to call the meeting to order for the Oxnard Public Works and Transportation Committee for March 25th, 2025. Madam Clerk, may we have the roll call and posting of the agenda followed by the Pledge of Allegiance?
Chair MacArthur.
Here.
Committee Member Basua.
Here.
Committee Member Teran.
Here.
The agenda for this meeting was posted in the kiosk at City Hall, the Oxnard Public Library, the city administrative offices, and on the city's website on Tuesday, March 18th. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comments for items not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any speakers for public comment?
Chair MacArthur, we do not have any public speakers virtually or in person for items not on the agenda.
Thank you. The next item is the consent agenda. And the only item is to approve the minutes for February 25th and March 11th for the Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting. Do any members have any questions or comments on the minutes?
I will move to accept the minutes as presented.
I will second.
And Mayor, just for the record, we have no speakers virtually or in person for the information and consent agenda. We'll start with Committee Member Teran,
Yes.
Committee Member Basua,
Aye.
and Chair MacArthur.
Yes,
And the motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
thank you. The next item on the agenda is item D1 from Public Works. Purchase a material handler for the Del Norte Regional Recycling Transfer Station. The recommendation is being made that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend the City Council approve and authorize the mayor to execute a purchase order with Quinn Company in the amount of $548,756.31 for a material handler for the Del Norte Regional Recycling and Transfer Station. Any committee members have any questions of staff on this item? What would you like an overview of it? Mayor Pro Tem? Okay. Good. Ready? Sounds like Mayor Pro Tem wants an overview.
Yes, if you don't mind, Mr. Llanes, just a quick overview of this item and maybe a brief explanation for the public about what a material handler is.
Mayor Pro Tem, committee members, good evening. Brian Llanes, Assistant Public Works Director. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but this was a great addition to some of our equipment to help us run our material recycling facility at Del Norte. And staff did a great job of seeking the grant funding for this piece of equipment. I want to introduce our division manager for environmental resources, which is Eric Zetz, and James Torres, who is our MRF manager, again, the material recycling facility manager. And James, I think, is probably the most excited about this piece of equipment because it's his staff that will benefit deeply from this purchase because of the material that we do handle on a regular basis. Most of our material recycling facilities throughout California and the nation have this piece of equipment. We've been eyeing this piece of equipment for several years now, and we finally are going to be able to hopefully get this soon and really be an asset for our day-to-day operations. And not only that, but our diversion, separating our green waste and our recyclables from the refuse that goes to the landfill. But James, if you want to talk about your new piece of equipment and what it's going to do to help your operations, that'd be great.
Hello, Mayor, council members. This waste handler will be a great benefit to our facility. Currently, what we use is 950 wheel loaders. It's a wheel loader is sort of like a heavy equipment with a bucket and pushes our material into our transfer vehicles. This piece of equipment, the new one, acts more like an excavator with a grappler, so it'll pick up and drop and place in certain locations of the trailer to even the loads. And that's where That's for the waste on the recycling, and the recycling part of it, currently what we use are small little skid steers, and they have a grappler bucket. And so what they have to do, which is a fine art, it takes a lot of experience to be able to feed this material evenly, what we call is feather the material onto the conveyor system. And it takes a while, it takes a lot of practice to get that done so that there's a light layer of material going across the conveyor so that the sorters downstream that have to handpick this material, they're not pulling from heavy loads of material. Also, a lot of the recycle can be seen and pulled from the sorting line. So with the waste handler, it's easier to feather this material by pinching material, swinging it over the conveyor, and then sort of fluffing it onto the conveyor. So it'd make it a lot easier, a lot smoother. It's easier on our equipment. It's easier on the 30-year-old conveyor. So this is, not only is it going to be more efficient for the operation on the wear of tires on the 950 loaders, the damage to the transfer trailers when we have to pack with the 950s, now we can place the material. The efficiency of it is going to be beneficial, and not only that, but the safety of our employees is going to be, it elevates the safety factor on sorting on our old equipment. The other item on this piece of equipment is that sorry. The other item that's beneficial on this piece of equipment is that this waste handler has load cells built into the machine. So when we load waste into the transfer trailers, we load up to 21, 22 tons. We try to make that happen with a wheel loader. With the waste handler, we can pick up maybe per load or per pick a half a ton and drop it. I'm not sure what the number is, but half a ton, drop it. The operator inside the cab can see the actual number and how close he's getting to that magic number that we want to hit. So not only do we have calibrated scales on the floor, but the machine also has a calibrated scale system in it so that we'll be pretty close to hitting that magic number. So I'm looking forward to this machine. It's been a long time waiting.
Great, thank you very much for that. And
Yeah.
I'll note also, just before you leave the podium, that because this was sourced well and we have the piggybacking we're able to do, there's a 26% discount, a savings of $174,555 to the city. And so to yourself or your team or whoever was involved in sourcing that and doing the legwork and negotiating it, just thank you for your additional work on that, because it's great that you're getting what you need in order to do the job well and efficiently and keep our staff safe. But when we can get a really great price on it, even better. So thank you, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, great work. Thanks,
Thank you.
James. Yeah. Any other comment, questions, or Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers on this item?
Chair MacArthur, for the record, we do not have any virtual or in-person speakers for this item. Thank you.
Thank you. What's the wish of the committee members?
I will move the recommendation.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
Committee Member Basua? Aye. Committee Member Teran?
Yes.
Chair MacArthur?
Yes,
And the motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
thank you. The next item on the agenda is item D2. From Public Works, the subject, draft maintenance and funding policy for landscape maintenance district. The recommendation, provide final recommendations on the draft policy sections And number 2, recommend staff present a maintenance and funding policy for landscape maintenance districts to the City Council for consideration. Any committee member want to ask any questions of staff on this item? Or do you want to just do a quick overview? Yeah, yeah. You would just do a quick overview of this item, please?
Absolutely. Good evening, committee. Anthony Miller, Special Districts Manager with the City of Oxnard, and a relatively brief overview of this item. This is a continuation of an item that was brought at the I believe it was the February 24th, 25th, somewhere in there. It was last month's Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting, and what we sought to do with this specific continuation item was to hone in on some specific policy sections that were based on what we heard from the committee at the last meeting, and provide essentially an either-or option of combination of what we heard plus staff recommendation on specific items within a potential policy document for landscape maintenance districts that center around items that didn't quite have a consensus from staff's, from what staff heard from the committee last time. Those items specifically revolve around topics such as the polling and balloting process within an LMD, apologies, it's a long staff report, certain funding and practices and priorities specifically in regard to fund balance deficits, funding and operating reserve guidance, and priorities for when expenses are exceeding revenues. Those specific items are important to the annual functioning of an LMD and also to the calculation of assessments year in and year out. And having a consensus on those specific items between the policy options presented within the staff report would be required before being able to present a fully fledged out policy document.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm just wondering if the efficient way to go about this for this evening would be, is it safe to assume that anything that was not highlighted in the tables, that staff has pretty clear direction on where the committee was with that?
Correct. So the areas that were highlighted specifically within the staff report, either in yellow or in orange, it indicated either an item that was considered what we considered operative text, so effectively what was kind of the meat, the teeth, if you will, of the actual text being recommended, or something that staff had heard specific direction on. Everything else that's not highlighted is language that, in order for the policy to actually function, would have to be included regardless of what was recommended. Items that are highlighted in orange are items that are in addition to or in conjunction with items that the committee recommended previously, and those items are specifically staff recommendations that we would recommend be included in any policy document if either side of any of the tables was chosen. That orange text is something that we would recommend on either side where it's present.
Okay. So does it seem logical then that maybe we can go table by table on this to have a robust discussion on this to follow up on items he brought back to us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the
absolutely.
mayor's, approval and the rest of the committee, maybe we can just start with table 4.
Yeah.
And that's polling and balloting.
So are we going to read these out loud, or we're going to read them to ourselves and then make comments?
Well, I think we have, it seems that most of the discussion we had last time is outlined with the highlights being the last things they want to confirm with us. And I'll note that in table 4, the list of actions and the cost of materials would be borne solely by the districts or its affected property owners. The big orange thing, though, or the orange highlight here, is the 66% plus 1 of the survey responses to establish significant interest. And it sounds like you need that threshold, or you need some tangible thing in the policy. Is that correct?
It's something that we would recommend simply because the way polling and balloting works is that not every resident with an LMD, not every property owner with an LMD might respond to a poll or ballot. So in order to set that polling, I will have to be very specific here because polling and balloting are two different things. So a polling is effectively an opinion poll. Do you support this or do you not? A ballot is actually where you mark your choice yes or no. So if we were to poll a district, or excuse me, if a district is to poll itself and the respondents are counted in such a way that it seems as though they support a ballot measure more than the community may, setting that threshold higher would protect the city from potentially going down a ballot measure road and having it fail when it otherwise might have been prevented from even going down the ballot measure process to begin with.
Okay, and I appreciate that explanation. Can you share a little bit about why staff is strongly recommending 66% plus one versus a basic majority of 50% plus one?
So the threshold for passing a Proposition 218 ballot within an LMD is 50% plus one of the ballots cast. And so the way ballots are counted are dependent upon what benefit calculation exists within a district. So that can change based on the amount of assessment somebody pays. So certain votes may count more than other votes. However, with a poll, with a district poll ahead of time, you may not have that complex level of analysis. So setting the 66% at 2/3 is a very high threshold. Staff anticipates that would at least provide us with enough analysis, enough insight into whether or not a ballot actually might be successful. And I believe Public Works Director might have some input on this as well.
So just a couple of things that I will add to what Anthony said, and this is just some experience that I've seen. The Prop 218 process is expensive. You have to do an engineer's report, you actually have to do balloting, you have to count that ballot. So that process is relatively expensive, especially when we're talking about some of the smaller districts and what they can afford. So we want to be sensitive about calling that ballot, especially if in the fact that hopefully it doesn't happen, but if the ballot fails, the city's really going to pick up that cost, right? And as Anthony explained, the Prop 218 process is a majority protest process, and you only count the ballots returned, so not everybody actually returns their ballots. I've gone through this process over a handful of times, more times than I wanted to do it, and not every ballot gets returned. And so, it's actually relatively, unfortunately, a small percentage of the ballots, not small, 50% of the ballots, somewhere in there get returned. And so you're sort of dealing with a percentage of a percentage. And so the idea here is that before we even go down that path and before we even want to put that money forward, what is the real desire of that community? And the polling, it's really just a temperature. You're taking the temperature. And so we really want to know that temperature before we start going down that path. And so other places we really want to understand, is there really this support of this balloting process before we go down that path? And that's why we typically set that polling threshold higher than what the actual ballot process requires, such that we're not, my words, spinning our wheels with a pretty expensive balloting process. And so that's a pretty typical a bar in terms of the polling.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. And hearing that, if staff is strongly recommending it for those reasons to ensure that there truly is community-based interest in proceeding beyond that point, if they hit that threshold of the supermajority of 2/3 plus one, it makes sense to me why that recommendation is there. So I'm willing to support that piece.
I will also support that piece.
Yeah, seems very logical. Michael, that's a high number, right? That's a really aggressive number to try to achieve 66% to get returned. But what happens if you don't get that number? What do you do?
then we just wouldn't do the Prop 218 process. I would say that it's actually when the community wants to support this, you typically get that 66%. When you really get the community behind this, because that's really what drives this. The community drives these kinds of processes. It should not be driven by the city. It should not be driven by staff. This should be driven by the community. And so when they get behind it and they get the folks involved in it, that 66% comes pretty fast.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Wolf. Yeah,
All right, thank you for that.
Okay.
thank you.
Did you have something? All right.
I'm sorry, I don't
Yes.
mean to interrupt, but there is
Go
a
ahead.
further section down on the next page that is
Yes.
also in order. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was still part of the same table.
Yes.
Yes. So I see the yellow highlights leading into that next part are parts we already discussed, and I'm good with those as well. And for the next orange portion on the next page, it's under the last bullet point in the table, item B. If balloting fails in any fiscal year, the city will not fund further measures until at least one fiscal year passes since the close of the previous failed ballot, unless otherwise directed by city council. And maybe if we can have just a little bit of elaboration on the logic behind that and what we've seen in other jurisdictions with similar policies.
Yeah, I think I may have mentioned this the last time we talked about this. Obviously, we don't want to continue to run through ballot processes. Again, it's relatively expensive to do the engineer's report and do the actual balloting, and so we don't want to continuously having these annual requests to do these balloting. And so sort of this cooling off period, especially because if we do approve the left side of this table, the city's picking up the tab here. And so that's part of the reason why we want that sort of, that cooling off. But again, if the community really comes forward and wants to ballot again, I've seen this sort of wave happen where the first result, the first balloting process results in a majority protest as a no, and the community understands what that no means. Well, they didn't understand what the no meant the first time, but they get together and they say, well, this is what really a no meant. Is this really what you want a community to look like? And that typically turns into a very well-organized community that educates themselves on, if this is what you really want, then we won't ballot again. But I will say that about 50% of the time, they want to ballot again when they see the results of the no vote. And so I think there's an opportunity for that to happen again, but I just don't think it should happen in consecutive fiscal years, because I really think there's a cost associated with that shouldn't be burdened by the city.
Sure, and I'd imagine in practice that would look like, there's the ballot process, it fails, and then that triggers the other parts of the policy where we reduce level of service or reduce services themselves or do the maximum assessment, right? And all those other things that are the steps we would take. And then an entire fiscal year at minimum passes where they experience either that reduction in service or whatever the other steps were. And they can have a very real conversation as a community. Okay, this didn't go through. Are we happy with the way things are?
Correct.
If so, let's continue. If not, we can try again now after this cool-off period has happened.
That's correct. Now, we also put in some flexibility in there with the last language, which says unless otherwise directed by the city council. So, we obviously can come back to city council if there's some reason why there should be a need for us to ballot again at some lesser period of time. We can make that recommendation to the city council, and obviously
Sure.
you guys can direct us to do that.
I would imagine that flexibility is probably helpful if it's a small LMD and the numbers are magnified, pretty easily by how people vote. You could have a handful of people saying, "Oh, I didn't know what that meant. I would like to change my vote," and perhaps that's a conversation that could be had in the following fiscal year. Okay, well, if we have X number of people who just didn't understand the process or realize now that they wish they could have voted a different way, then perhaps that's where that conversation can happen within that flexibility, I'd imagine.
And it actually is also, if something else happens, if we go out and we see a huge consumer price index increase that affects the cost of something that we didn't anticipate, or there's a failure of the irrigation system, or if there's something like that actually happens that we would recommend, or the community would recommend, hey, you know what, this just we didn't know this the last time we voted. Can we vote again? You know, so it's not necessarily just potentially somebody realizing the results of a no vote. It just could be some unknowns that potentially come our way, so.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share that I appreciate the explanations. I support both of those strong recommendations that were highlighted in orange.
I will follow that with the comment that I really appreciate staff adding that city council may approve to loan the district, because it also allows council to bring this item if they're getting, you know, calls from that specific district. That city council does have the opportunity to bring this back.
Yeah, I appreciate that insertion in there. If we're all okay with it, we'll move to table 5.
Can I just make sure, and I don't know if it was explicitly stated, but obviously the way that Anthony put together the tables, it's even the yellow and the orange, but it's also a left and right kind of decision as well. So if there's any recommendations, suggestions on the left and right, we would take that as well. We also try to couch it such that we put the prior support of what we heard last time on the top, so you can see your names on top there. So if there's anything that's different from the last time we discussed, please let us know, but it's also a left and right choice for each one of the tables after beginning with table 4.
Yeah, I'll just say that my name's already on that on the left side, so I'll go with that. I didn't see any items beyond what we just discussed that I would see that we'd need to change or shift. I think this one's pretty well put together already with those recommendations added.
So maybe we should just make sure we say left side, right side in order to make sure staff knows what we're talking about.
That
So
would
in
be
this case-
appreciated.
Okay, so in this case, it would be the left side that we're referring to.
Table 4 left.
Yeah, table 4 left.
Yeah, I think we're all going to be on the left side. So moving down to table 5. The only thing in yellow here is the reduction of services and the levy and the collection of the required payment at the maximum legally allowable rate shall be prioritized before the city council is asked to approve a subsidy. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Any comments on that?
No, Mayor, are you okay with the left side, or do
Oh,
you
yeah, I'm
still want to
sorry.
discuss the right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Basua. I'm okay. I'm referring to the left side.
Okay,
And, yeah, I support the left side.
okay. I will also support the left side on
I-
table 5.
Same, I will also support those.
And I just want to note here with this section is that there are 2 bullets on the left-hand side due to the text that was discussed last time. So we're not leaving something out on the right-hand side just on purpose because there was further explanation we figured was necessary.
Thank you. And the only item if we move down to table 6, the operating reserves approximately equal to 25% of its annual operating budget. Or our operating expenses, which I think that was the recommendation last time. I'm okay with that. Mayor Pro Tem or Councilwoman Basua, anything on that? That's the
I'm
left side
okay
again.
with the 25, but on the right side, there is a staff recommendation that if we can have staff address why it is they're making this recommendation in order for us to have a better understanding.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. I figured this is the item here that staff is recommending separate from what we heard at the last committee meeting. And the primary driver for that is due to really what these reserves are kept for, and also what the language being used actually does to a district during the budgeting and assessment process. So for districts that are fully funded, a range that we've outlined within the right-hand column, that's 16.6% and 47.4%. We attempted to include, make sure I get my language correct here, we attempted to include a reserve requirement as a floor, but including Councilmember Basua's recommendation that reserve requirement not be too high. And also keep a ceiling at what the Streets and Highways Code actually says within the code text itself at 47.4%. The reason for doing that, it allows the district flexibility during the budgeting process so that we aren't having to require too much money be set aside for reserves that might then affect the actual maintenance budget, because if a district is levied at maximum and we are required to have a cash flow reserve requirement of 47%, it means that it will potentially restrict the amount of money that can actually be used in an operating budget, because the more operating budget you have, the more reserves you have to have. So putting together a range for that allows more flexibility from our perspective. And then for underfunded and deficient districts, you'll notice that we've changed the insure language to endeavor to insure. So basically make it a soft floor, and the same range applies. So if we can get within that range, it allows us to be flexible. But if we can't make it to that range, if we're at 16.6%, it doesn't necessarily require us to reduce services to hit that cash flow reserve. However, it does essentially put up a red flag for us to know that this could be a problem. The right-hand column is much more flexible than the left-hand column. And in the left-hand column, we did input a orange highlight on the 25%. That was simply because 16.6% can actually be very, very low for some districts. Some smaller districts with smaller budgets, 16%, you're talking about $800. So that's not a very high number. You're not really going to be able to do much with $800 if something breaks, or if there's a reason to use that cash flow for our cash reserve for something. 25% does allow for a larger dollar figure to be kept, but also there's the endeavor to insure language on the left-hand side as well. So we attempted to reflect the comments we heard from the last meeting, but we also attempted to put a recommendation that would provide staff with quite a bit of flexibility during this process. And if there are specific questions about any of the actual percentage figures, I can go over those as well.
Go ahead.
I can appreciate the flexibility that would come with the range on the right column, especially if that allows staff the ability to look at a case-by-case or LMD by LMD basis. And the example you used, if you have one where 16% is $800, then maybe the goal, not necessarily the requirement, but the goal is another number that's more appropriate for that LMD, where some of the larger ones, 16.6% may suffice for them, and it's a good goal to have them at that so that they have that reserve for them. But having that ability, that flexibility to look at what's going to best serve those LMDs and what residents can provide input on as well for understanding those goals for reserves, I think that's something I think I can get behind as far as staff's recommendation on that. Now, the range you came up with, 16.6% to 47.4%, is that in the statute, or is there a reason we had that floor and that ceiling? I mean, is there a way to do like 20 to 47, or I'm just wondering on that.
If the pleasure of the committee is to recommend a specific percentage, we can do that. But the 47.4% is explicitly, or not explicitly, excuse me, that is our calculation of the Streets and Highways Code ceiling for until you receive your first property tax allocation. The 16.6% was simply used as an example to match the city's reserve requirement. So that was where we figured those were good places to put the goalposts.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that that we even have flexibility, at least in the floor, versus, maybe there's something in the code that I wasn't aware of, that the committee wasn't aware of, just to give you a chance to explicitly state whether that was required of us to have that number or not. But, I see that on the left side, there was the endeavor to ensure the 25% for annual operating expenses for the reserve. So I'll just leave that open to the rest of the committee, their thoughts on that. I'm good with the right-hand side, but I'm open to adjusting the percentages if folks are open to that too. But with the cap, of course, of what the code actually states we can have it set at.
So maybe I'm just overthinking this, but I I can see where we have an LMD and we have residents complaining that maybe 47 is too much, but in this case, you said $800, that would add an additional, whatever, 1,200, make it a $1,200 in reserve. Would it not be best to do a percentage based on LMD budget? So if the budget is this is the percentage of reserve, instead of leaving it wide open? And leaving it for residents to complain, well, this says 16.6 to 47.4, why am I at 25, why am I at 30?
So I will say that by not specifying, I think my response to this is,
And again, I might be just over analyzing this.
no, I think I understand what your question really is getting at, and I can appreciate it, because 47.4% can be quite substantial in some districts. In other districts, it's not as bad. But the range allows for that number to exist within any one of those points. And if you were to, say, have a district that at 1 year was at 47.4%, there would be no requirement within the right-hand column to keep it there. We could, if upon request from the residents, actually provide an additional levy credit to lower their reserve balance the following year. That would absolutely be an option. What I would be worried about from a staff perspective is that during the budget process, we would have to classify a district effectively. It's like, okay, if you have this much of a budget, your reserve percentage is going to be this range. So the way I'm understanding your point, I think, is that if you would end up having these percentage classifications that they might fall into or another. The way I read this is on the right-hand side is that those exist, it's just we're not defining them. If we have the option to keep it at 47.4% and there is no feedback from the community, then we can keep it there. But if there is feedback from the community, we can always lower that reserve balance. So that does exist, that flexibility exists on the right-hand side, but it's just not explicitly defined as to where it's going to fall.
So would it be best, and I get that, so I guess what I'm trying to avoid, as a staff member, I would hate to start having residents say, okay, well, you know what, we're at 16.6. That's what this says, why are you putting me at 47? Would it be wise, and I'm okay with the right, I totally appreciate what staff's recommendation is, and I understand it, but would it be wise to say that reserves will not be less than a certain dollar amount and or the 16.6 to 40 percentage? I'm just thinking, would a dollar amount be beneficial in this case? Because you're right, you can't do anything with 800, but can you do something with 2,000?
Yeah, so the dollar amount will be a little bit questionable because it could exceed the maximum allowed in the Streets and Highway Code section. So let me ask a question, if you don't mind, because I think I understand the issue. The issue, I feel like, is we don't want to have too much in reserves. I think that's kind of, and maybe it's the fact that we have a higher end in there, right? And so potentially a policy that sets a minimum for a fully funded. So I want to make sure we're clear. The first bullet point talks about a fully funded district. So this is a district that is able to fund its reserves with actually not having any current issues. And Anthony's explanation is in those kinds of situations, having a reserve fund balance allows for certain things to be able to occur, emergencies, cash flow issues, that kind of stuff, right? So I think if we just left the top part off and let the Streets and Highway Code section just be what it is, that will direct us that says you can't go any higher than this because that's what the code says. I think that's what you're getting at, and we just live with some sort of lower limit so that we don't get into a situation such that we don't have a reserve fund balance for a fully funded district and get into these situations where we can't do some services, and we have to start making those difficult choices to a fully funded district, which we shouldn't have to do. So I'm gonna look at Anthony. I think that there's a possibility for us to take and not to exceed 47.7 and just put in the language and not to exceed the Streets and Highway Code section.
Absolutely. And it effectively does the same thing.
Okay, I'm good with that.
And I
Yeah,
think
it does,
Sorry,
it
go ahead.
does do the same thing, but I understand it makes it easier. For fully funded, it will be no less than 16.6, period. But then for underfunded, it goes on and it says, it will endeavor to ensure no less than 16.6, but not to exceed 47.4.
And we'll change the language in that second bullet to just say, the Streets and Highway Code section will drive the upper limit, right? Because we just can't exceed that because that's what
Right.
the code says. But the second bullet point is for the underfunded or deficit districts. And to Anthony's point, what the decision his team has had to make in the past is if we had a hard floor for a reserve, they then had to go and look at their day-to-day operations and cut operations to hit that hard floor. And I think that was not what we really wanted to do.
Right.
I don't think that was the intent of what we wanted to do. We didn't want to cut the day-to-day services just to try to meet some reserve fund balance that is actually good to have, but not necessarily absolutely have to have. So that's why we split these in two, and I think Anthony did a really good job splitting them in two, such that it gives him the flexibility to do day-to-day stuff, but not at the detriment of the operations of the daily services that the residents want.
Okay, with those recommendations and with those changes, I'm good with table 6, right-hand side.
I'm good with that too. Thank you, Councilwoman, for that discussion. I'll just say that don't ever feel bad about overthinking or analyzing, because that's my job, so thank you.
We made this as complex as possible, so I mean,
But I would
You're
like
making me
to,
think.
yeah. I would like to just draw attention also to earlier in the staff report to table 1, where, and I appreciate staff's doing this, they did do a monthly equivalent calculation for each of the LMDs. And I mean, we can see some of them are, below $10 a month on what their, their assessment is, or their annual rate, what it calculates to on a monthly. And, I look at if we do, $7.02, and if they were at the 47%, I mean, it'd be like $10, right? If that's even within, allowable for their assessment. But I imagine that's up to the community to have that discussion. But I would hope that when they see those numbers like that, they think, okay, if I can do this and it's going to add to reserve and allow us to have that cushion, if a tree falls or something happens that we need to address within the fiscal year or the operations year, they have the ability to do that. So I think those conversations can really just kind of open folks' eyes to what this would entail. And knowing, as Mr. Wolf alluded to, this is not to carry a heavy reserve year over year over year. That's not the intention here, nor does it function like a savings account like we would have.
right, because the Streets and Highway Code section it says that what we're supposed to do is estimate the costs for next year. This is not, we're not getting down to the exact science. I mean, these are, I think I've said this before, if I knew what was going to happen in the future, I wouldn't be sitting at this chair. So these are estimates of what we think they're going to happen, and so these are our best estimates going 12 months in advance. And so that's kind of some of the reasons why we have these estimates, and we want to have these abilities to have these reserves to address when the tree falls or when the irrigation breaks, when those kind of things happen.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Wolf.
And if I actually may add one item to that, so Councilmember Duran, you pointed out some of these districts are working with a monthly equivalent payment of $7.32 per benefit unit. Those districts highlighted in yellow within that table have all been max assessed within the last 5 years, because those are our capped districts. Those highlighted in yellow districts are capped. So effectively, a requirement at 47.4% may actually restrict us from performing specific maintenance duties simply to have a cash flow reserve. And we would not have the ability to make any adjustment from the assessment perspective to potentially make up for that.
Yeah, and that's where the flexibility comes in this, when needed. So, yes, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. We'll move to table 7. Any comments on that? I'm personally in favor of the right side, where I think the key difference is one, being with no particular order, the preferences, and the other is specifying that it has to be in that specific order. That's just my observations. I don't know if any other committee member has a comment or observation on that table.
And that is the difference.
It is a different, yeah. I mean, I just personally like the flexibility of something not being so rigid in any particular order versus actually having to follow an order. That's just my preference.
And just to confirm, Mayor, you mentioned the right side was your preference?
Yeah, the right side indicates that if a district is underfunded or deficient, then the following methods in no particular order or preferences may be taken. So essentially they're the same, versus the left side is in the following specific order. It's the only difference I see. So I think just having the flexibility to move in any order that I think staff deems best practice, and also allows city council direction as well to be a key element versus being the last to be taken into account.
Okay, and I think if I can, Mayor?
Absolutely.
I think I see what the mayor is saying is that if on the left we have, the bullet and then sub-items A, B, C, et cetera, whereas on the right side we have bullet points, is that implying that this is a process flow on the left where these are options on the right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Well, I note that, I'm sorry, were you finished?
No,
Mayor?
I'm done.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
I note that for the left side, we do have Councilwoman Misua and I had discussed this last time, and it seemed to be that the left side of the staff's recommendation, where the right side is alternative language from other agencies with LMDs and having their policies in place. But I'm interested in hearing staff's thoughts on one versus the other, given that they recommended the left side, but hearing that the right side is options versus a process flow.
So the left-hand side, I would say, simply as staff recommend. Well, actually, let me back up here really quick. The really important text that staff is recommending here is the orange text that's highlighted. That is something that staff didn't actually specifically hear at the last committee meeting, but it's something that we wanted to make sure was included specifically within the language, regardless of the option chosen, simply to make sure that that was explicitly called out as a tool in the toolbox, if you will. But in regards to defining a process flow, it really is a simplicity's sake item. So even if we were using the right column text, the first option staff would likely recommend is using reserves as any available reserves, to fund operations and maintenance, or to continue funding operations and maintenance. However, on the left-hand side, what we had heard at the previous meeting was there seemed to be a preference between certain things happening before others, and when there is the potential for either disagreement or for a left up for staff interpretation, I personally will always defer to what the process specifically lays out for us, which is the reason primarily for the staff recommendation.
And if I may, I actually was going to say the exact same thing if I was to put on a staff hat. I would appreciate having, these are our steps and this is what we followed, this is where I'm at, not trying to, go and see, okay, which one am I going to pick and is it going to be wrong? Instead, I have instructions on how to deal with this situation. So my preference is still the left side, but that's just me, putting on a staff hat.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you for that, Councilwoman. I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm overthinking and overanalyzing down here on either one of those, and I appreciate hearing staff's view on that. I know Mr. Wolf, just from an engineering perspective, when you look at troubleshooting something, you do step one, this, if yes, then we go here, if no, we go here, then, and you kind of go through that process flow, right? From a staff perspective, perhaps you or Mr. Hallett or Mr. Miller can share, if we were to go with the left side, does that still allow flexibility where we can go on an LMD by LMD basis, or are we going to treat it like an actual flow chart where we do this, then this, then this?
May I say just one last comment, just so I don't forget? I mentioned staff side, but I also want to say on the council side, you know, if an LMD was in my district and I got a complaint, I'm going to be like, oh, why did you not eliminate maintenance services before you applied the maximum? I mean, you know what I mean? I'm going to be questioning staff on why they chose what they chose. So I just wanted to make sure that I made that comment, you know. I made a comment on staff side, now I'm making a comment with my city council hat on, you know. It would just open up a box where council can say, well, you know what, I think you made the wrong decision and you should have gone with reduced expenses before you applied the maximum levy. So, I mean, you know, it could just, so I just wanted to make sure that
Those are important
make my
points, for
comment.
sure. Yeah.
Valid point, yeah.
We'll see what staff's perspective is on having heard that discussion.
Okay, so I will say is that having a defined flow chart of options actually does address specifically the example that you brought up, Councilmember Brazua. The elimination of maintenance services is a loaded topic. If you are eliminating maintenance services, either someone else is doing them or they're not being performed. And that really speaks to a larger question as to, is a district being subsidized or not? And if a district is being subsidized, then has the full capacity of the district's funding availability been tapped prior to making that decision? So that is part of the reason for the maximum levy item being where it is. Because if a district is legally allowed to levy up to a certain point, then that is the maximum amount of funding that a district can generate for the maintenance of its own improvements. And these districts are intended to be self-supporting. If, as a staff member, I'm unilaterally choosing to remove maintenance services in order to keep an assessment low, I don't personally think that's a decision that I should be making. That, to me, speaks more of a policy question, which is why we have this document being presented today. Something else I would like to point out here between the difference between the two is that the top half of both of these bullets and this list, they're in the same order for a reason. The elimination of maintenance services has been moved in one, not for any particular reason, but it's just because it's a part of the list. But the first three items would likely be done regardless in that order of whether or not you're choosing the left column or the right column. It's really the question of what's the first priority from a staff perspective. Are we eliminating services before we're max levying? Are we max levying and then eliminating services after the fact? And then the very bottom section is kind of what I would consider the last ditch option, and it's something similar to what was pursued in 2015-16, was just the flat out removal of improvements from a district. We're just not going to take care of this anymore. We're going to specify someone else is responsible for this particular item. So again, the right-hand side may not look as though it's in a priority order with the bullets, but it effectively would be prioritized from a staff's perspective, regardless of whether or not it was prescribed or not.
Right, yeah, that's the way I take it. Any other comments?
I'll just share my my thoughts, having heard all this discussion, and I appreciate Councilwoman Brazua providing some additional context for that side of the page. I would lean more toward the left-hand side based solely on the fact that it is stated steps and a stated process that do this, then this, then this, then this. And I can appreciate also having the maximum levy placed above eliminating maintenance services, even though I know it's, not necessarily a step-by-step on the right-hand side, but my preference would be for the left-hand side of the, or the left column.
Only reason I was pushing for right myself, which I hear, I think it just, if I understand it correctly, I think it's very logical sense that they would follow those steps anyway, regardless whether they're enumerated or not, they just logically would follow that. I just would like the flexibility of having, for example, I can see if we're having this big event or where the Dallas Cowboys are coming, for example, and they're below the reserves and everything else, I would hate to eliminate services, having our city look the way it does when we have massive tourism coming into our city. So I would appreciate the flexibility of having city council then say, hey, let's just take care of it for now until we get past whatever event we're having. So that's why, but I would think logically they're gonna follow the enumerated steps anyway, whether they're bulleted or not. They're just my understanding, and I think he reiterated that they're gonna be followed anyway. That was my reasoning for pushing to the right side.
Is there an opportunity for us to add language to G that just says this, that G may supersede? I think where you're going is that there may be some circumstances that need to be superseded.
Correct, yeah.
And so, I don't want Anthony to yell at me, but other city council direction may supersede items A through F.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a good compromise, excellent, yeah, yep.
And I will say is that items F and E would likely have to take council action to begin with. Those would likely be, well, not likely, but they would be required to be called out within the engineering document that is prepared every year. And there would have to be substantial discussion around those to begin with. So if there is an opportunity to take an action before those two steps are taken, that language would allow it.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Did you see that? It just came in, yeah.
So with that, if we make that addition, other city council direction may supersede items A through F, Mayor, you're okay with the left
Yep.
side of that?
Yep,
Okay, thank you.
perfect. Thank you, everyone. Yeah,
Thank you.
That was a great discussion. I think that was the last one, right? Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. I move to approve it as with the suggestions.
Can we just run through what we heard, just to make sure everybody's on the same page?
Sure,
Anthony, can you run through the tables, please?
Absolutely. So I will start with table 4, I believe. Yes, so table 4 had an indicated preference for the left-hand side without any changes. With table 5, an indicated preference for the left-hand side with no changes. Table 6, an indicated preference for the right-hand side with changes to the 47.4% language to be not to exceed the Streets and Highways Code section 22569. I added that information because I know the code. And table 7 is an indicated preference for the left-hand column with a change to the last item in the list to other city council direction may supersede items above, or A through F. I can specify either way.
Wonderful, yep. Madam Clerk, are there any speakers on this item?
Chair MacArthur, we do not have any public speakers virtually or in person for this item. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Given that, I move to approve the item with the recommended suggestions.
I will second, and I see the consultants here. I want to thank Mr. Mandel for being here, and
Apologize, yes, sir.
our staff as well. Thank you for all your work on this.
Absolutely, thank you for the work on this, Mr. Wolf. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the vote?
Committee Member Teran,
Yes.
Committee Member Basua, Chair MacArthur,
Yes,
and the motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
thank you. And unless a member has an item for a future agenda, there be no further business on the agenda. And without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you. Did you see that?